Hi, and welcome to Prog Will Find a Way, your friendly neighborhood progcast. We're back for 2024. It's going to be a good year.
First of the new year, and it
There you
snowed
go.
today, just making it.
It's winter.
It
and
is
because
winter.
it's winter, you're wearing
little
flannel.
more,
I'm
yeah.
wearing my Emerson, Lake and Powell sweatshirt.
I do have a Yes t-shirt on underneath from back in the day, which is what we will be talking about today.
It's a lot. We're going back to the 80s.
But it's 40
80s
years old,
prog.
so it times have
Feels-
changed for this t-shirt
And
sizes.
where did you get the shirt? Where did you see him?
I saw them at I think it was Rosemont Horizon in Chicago.
Okay. All right. I
think that was what it was called, but it was,
fall,
many years
fall of
ago.
'84. Was that tour? Or at
It
least-
was. I think it was like their second or third date of the 90125
okay.
tour. What had happened was they were supposed to have the tour, and then Trevor Rabin got injured at a swimming accident, a bizarre swimming accident where somebody landed on him from a slide or something while he was in the pool, and he injured his spleen and had to,
splenectomy.
postpone the tour for a couple months, and then so this was probably spring of '84.
Oh, okay.
Late spring.
Okay.
Because I was still in college, so
All
it
right.
was.
I remember seeing them. I could have sworn it was the fall.
Well, I came back. I saw them in the fall at like New Haven Coliseum or something like that for the 90125 tour.
Okay.
They did like a whole second leg.
Okay, that's when I saw them. So we
Yeah.
actually were there together, but
They
not,
did the
not together.
Purple Haze encore,
Right.
I believe.
Yes. Yes.
So anyway, today is we were thinking we'd talk about 80s Prague.
Yes, 80s Prague. Oh, and I procured this beauty
right.
at the Madison Square Garden, Emerson, Lake and Powell show. I want to say 85, but it could have been 86. I mean, I remember in my head surrounding events to that, but it's either 85 or 86.
I did not see that.
I think
that tour.
Actually, the more I think about it, the more I think it was 86. Like, I'm thinking March-ish 86. I'm probably completely wrong.
It's kind of interesting that they went from Emerson, Lake and Powell at Madison Square Garden to 3 at Toad's Place, which is a very small venue in
Yes,
Connecticut.
and that was the 80s as well.
Yeah.
I will never forget that concert because, first of all, Toad's Place, famous, but it's a club. It's a small stage. Yeah. They had to have risers off to the side of the stage to accommodate Keith's gear. So it was like they had to make it a bigger stage. But I will never forget that concert because I still believe, for myself, that is the loudest concert I've ever been to in my life. To the point where it got so loud that it went beyond hearing. Like, seriously.
It went past 11?
It went past 11. It was like 11.5 to 12. So that's what sticks out for me. Although at the time, and I guess it's a good time to talk about it, it just kind of brought up the same feelings and mood that a lot of the 80s gave me.
Yeah.
It's like... For us, I even feel like the 70s I got into a little late, but I was able to enjoy some of it contemporarily. I mean, the things I remember getting into on a contemporary basis before that, I would have just been listening to the radio, was probably around 73, and we talked about this, and we talked about 73.
No, my first Prague concerts were definitely in the 80s.
Yeah, well, that was just me being like, ooh, I like this band, I want to hear them. I was still a kid. I wasn't going to concerts for a few years or so. But, then I just always felt we got in and it was like, why is this not like close to the edge,
Right.
And why is the next album even farther away? Like you're going away from where I want you to go.
Yeah.
And that's like the late 70s. And that's kind of how I felt.
Well, yeah, I did not start going to concerts until 1980. Right. And so the first proggy kind of concert I saw, I think, was John Anderson's Animation tour in the city in New York. And I was blown away because they were playing these Yes medleys. The band was very good. And David Sanchez was playing keyboards. Yeah. I mean, it was really good. Yeah. And hearing John sing live for the first time was great because I was a huge Yes fan. Then
Is that 82, 83?
82.
Yeah.
So around the same time,
Yeah.
I saw Asia at Wolseley Hall, which was this very small venue at Yale. This was before they took off. So
Right.
this is before Heat of the Moment became this giant hit for them and the whole thing. It was right at the beginning of them releasing the album. So I went to see them, and I thought that was a really fun show because they played other songs and they had to fill out their set, so it was kind of an interesting thing. So it wasn't as poppy, and I think they took a little some more chances musically
back then.
So it was kind of, that was a
days.
very interesting show to see versus when I saw them later for the Alpha Tour, or that's the second album, right?
Yeah.
It was much more a big production show and the whole thing, and a little more stadium rock than seeing them at a small place on the Yale campus.
Right. It's almost, there's a branching off there. It was conscious. I mean, Asia was built around being, it was whoever the guy was, just, you shouldn't be playing bass in Roxy Music. Why are you playing with Uriah Heep? To John Wetton was like, you should be the front man. And they were like, build a band. And that's how you ended
that came
up
out
with
of
it.
UK, right? So the germs of that were in UK.
Definitely.
You could definitely see that happening.
Definitely. And even at the end of the Bruford Holdsworth, because they were playing some of those songs live.
Yeah.
That ended up on
Danger
that
Money?
second a Danger Money album.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was Caesar's Palace Blues. It was one of the more. It was not. It wasn't even Danger Money, which is like a bit proggy in itself, but it was the one of the short tunes, and it was like, oh, I mean, you knew the winds were changing, and I mean, they that was the wave of what album oriented rock, right? Like, I mean, all those '80s big arena things. Asia was one of those. The prototype,
the Journeys and
all those speed. I mean, every band that's kind of gone up and is back down,
right? But still around, a lot of
but
them.
Still around.
And back on the upswing, some of them. I mean, obviously, Journey has gone through a major renaissance with the. I mean, it's years now, but with what is this?
Don't Stop Believing. Well, and here's the interesting thing, right? When Prog was king, everybody did a bit of Prog, right? And the first couple of Journey albums are very Prog oriented, or you think of like Argent, another band that did more rock music, but there's Prog moments. There's so many of those during the 70s, and then it was like, well, that's not the thing anymore. So
let's adapt.
So it's either you have to evolve. And I mean, it was a depressing time to get into those bands and to see it dying. I mean, there was other stuff. We were kids too, so the new music, like Talking Heads and New Wave. I mean, I was totally into all that. But even some of those bands, like you heard well, it's not just that Brian Eno was producing it.
But they all had this. I don't know, kind of a feeling of making music different, right? Which is what the Prog ethos was way back when, right? Versus
originality,
what we're going to talk about, the early '80s Prog. That was the neo Prog that came out of that time. Yeah. So we had Yes reinventing themselves with 90125. We had Genesis becoming much more of a pop.
And already having been on that journey for a number of years.
Right. That's where they were headed.
Natural evolution.
And Phil Collins becoming a huge, huge pop star.
Yep.
We had Emerson, Lake and Powell. Floyd was kind of
we had Love
waning.
Beach. We had Love Beach, and then we had nothing, and it was better that way. No, we had the Greg Lake Band. We had Greg Lake Band, which was odd.
Yeah. So I mean,
see him outside of a huge band.
All these people, were still making music, but they were no longer like the forefront of music.
Right.
I think you could argue that Floyd, when they went into their kind of after the final cut, where nothing was happening until momentary lapse of reason, they're
right. But if we're talking about the '80s for Floyd, for me it started. I don't know about you, but. And I'm not a contrarian. Like I don't not like things just because they're popular. It's not that. But a friend of mine got The Wall the day it was released. It was either December of '79 or January of '80. I remember it being winter, and we put it on, and the beginning was good, And then it just slowly, I'm like, ugh.
There's just a lot.
It's just a lot there. And then I got a chance to see it live. So I went, I'm like, oh, this will be cool, you know? And it didn't help at all. And then it really didn't help that that's all they played. And then they left the stage. And I was like, I guess I'm getting off the boat. I was very not happy about all the people on stage either. It just seemed like a big production, and it was just another band that was, I mean, ELP went off a cliff and that was it, right? You know, Crimson went away. Fripp was around and that was great.
Yep.
But you know, but you know,
we're talking,
yes, and
we're
like
talking
you
like
said,
1980.
Yeah, and like
which
you said,
I still think of as the 70s.
right, but it's a bit like you said too, in that you know, they were still there, but they were getting old. You know, they were in their 30s.
But then Crimson.
Yes.
Reinvented.
Well, that's the thing. Yes.
A total reinvention.
Total reinvention. And I mean, if you, I don't, you know, and we'll talk about Neo Prog. So, cause that's a, you know, UK British experience.
Yes.
While we had, you know, Lou Reed and Talking Heads and television and all these other things.
Which is where the Crimson's,
you know, the more edgy stuff that went over to England.
Yeah.
You know, and it was just a little more of the edgy stuff to the. I mean, Fripp came to New York and lived in New York, but he was still around. He was doing good stuff.
And I love the
League of Gentlemen. I love the League of Gentlemen. That was 1980. But then it was like, then when Crimson was coming back, it was like, oh, okay, this is cool.
Right.
But it was
totally different.
But it felt at the time, it felt like, okay, this isn't looking back, this is looking forward.
Well, and that was like the first, for me, the first kind of math rocky kind of thing. Because Crimson, prior to that, Fripp was not as methodical in his playing to my ears.
Okay.
You know, he was soaring a little more on guitar solos versus the do 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 do, you know, that kind of thing. The interplay between he and Ballou was a new sound for me. It was happening in League of Gentlemen, obviously, and things like that.
And that's really where it was at the forefront, because it was all through Crimson. I mean, you know, Lark's Tongues and Asp. Like you hear
there, but it's not.
Just, well, the thing is it's just him. There wasn't a second melodic instrument doing counterpoint or doubling in, and that interweave which you get from the, like, you know, Philip Glass and that music. The Crimson then, but Fracture, right? Another good example where he's just doing these lines, but it's not the same.
It's not the same.
It's a little,
I don't know, rougher or
right. It really was
It
really was League of Gentlemen, only because they were playing straight 4 on the floor beats. So the patterns were repeating, and that was the first time the patterns repeated in like a normal fashion.
Over and over.
So then when Crimson came, it was almost like Ballou took the 4/4 patterns and Fripp did the interweaving stuff on top of it, and it got even crazier when Trey Gunn was there, because he was doing things as well. But yeah, that was the first kind of, that was a whole new language. It felt new. It felt now. You didn't feel like. And then to go see them and hear Red and hear Lark's Tongues Part 2, it was like, wow.
It was a different.
It was. I mean, when I think of the early 80s, I think of those shows I saw. I was lucky enough to see a lot of shows and sneak out. And at Toad's Place, it was only 20 minutes away. And they played, when they came to Connecticut, they would play 2 nights and 2 shows a night. And the set lists were always the same. But oh my gosh.
Well, you know, Crimson is always never. I mean, the set list might stay the same, but the music is never exactly the same. So
and you know, they're also. But then you look, where did they go? Right. So while Discipline was great, my favorite tour of theirs actually was. It was only a month, March and April of '82. So when they were writing beat, but hadn't recorded beat yet. So you were getting a few of the beat songs without lyrics, like The Howler without lyrics, and one other one. I want to say Two Hands, but I'm not sure it was. But anyways, it was a couple of songs that eventually, Neurotica, also no lyrics, although they had played that before anyways. But it was like, oh wow, it was all the stuff they had just played with Discipline, and then there's all this new stuff, and it just looked like this wide horizon. And I remember when Beat came out, I was like, oh, this is cool. But Heartbeat, I was like, oh, okay, they neither Follow You, Follow Me, or Misunderstanding on an album.
I don't know.
Everybody
I liked Heartbeat.
else.
I liked Heartbeat.
And then there was a little
Because-
bit of a drought, and then we got 3 of a perfect pair, which was okay, but it was like, it felt like the honeymoon was over. You know, it felt like I didn't see how they could go forward from that. It just seemed like it wasn't going anywhere.
But I like blues sensibilities as a songwriter, so I didn't mind that.
Well, as a band, the 4 of them, that was a great unit. They just, you know, and all 3 albums are just amazing.
Yeah. That was a fun moment of the 70s prog into the 80s.
Yes.
The Yes stuff, I'm a gigantic Yes fan, so I'm not going to continue to do that thing. But so those are the major players, right?
Right. And Rush. I mean, the Rush,
well,
but we talked a lot about Rush.
We talked about a lot about Rush the last time. But
too,
Rush kind of came into their own on the world stage.
Yes. In the 80s.
In the 80s.
Yeah, exactly.
You know? And that's where they they flourished.
Soften the edges a little, get that big 80s sound.
Yeah.
And that's what it turned, you know, a little more on the keyboards, a little less on the guitar, and we talked about all that last time too.
But then there was neo-prog.
Neo-prog. So just, I mean, I think everybody by now knows what neo-prog is. As all this stuff was happening in the late 70s, as we're talking about, there still were bands, local bands, that were into that kind of music and making that kind of music.
In England.
In England.
Not so much in America.
Not so much in America. They were trying to put that label on some bands. Like I remember in that time period, Zebra, when band Zebra, there was Crack the Sky, Happy the Man was around. There were some, but it wasn't to this level where these were regularly gigging musicians in different parts of England.
And it was like a movement.
And it was a movement. But what's interesting, and the reason we're talking about this is the latest issue of Prog Magazine talks about this time. And what I found fascinating, because they interview all the major players, you know, all the people in there, including Fish has like one quote, which is funny, so I'll have to talk about that. But they all kind of say we all kind of came up around the same time, but there was a lot of competition. It was not, the bands didn't think of it as a movement like, hey, we're all in this together. And that's actually the one quote they have about Fish. He was like, if I was doing anything, I was flying the flag for Marillion. He goes, 12th Night Pals, all these other bands. He goes, I didn't give a shit, you know? Yeah. I was only about fucking Marillion, you know?
Yeah. Which makes sense. Because they were all competing for the
They
for
were
the
all
time.
competing for this little slice of pie, but because it all happened, it got this label.
And so, you know, as homework for this, I listened to some of these, you know, early 80s
so in the
versions of
if you haven't seen the Prog article, it goes through the whole thing. It's a very interesting article, and you know, again, the interviews and the quotes of people, but they have playlists in there as well. And I've listened to a lot of that over the years, not necessarily at the time. I mean, I talked in past episodes about seeing Marillion in the early days in their first U.S. tours. But beyond that, you know, if I wasn't taking my money and going to a record store and buying an IQ record, you know, or that's not what I was doing, because I had no idea who they were. Now you can go on and to what you were just going to say about listening.
Yeah, but
listening to them.
I had no idea who they were, and B, I didn't really. It wasn't as interesting to me. I mean, although I was still following the prog bands that I loved, the new music I was listening to was more new wave stuff. Yep. And it was probably, most of it was probably British, but I mean, I was going to see OMD, and I was going to, you know, and their music was more interesting to me than somebody who sounded like Genesis did from 1974. Right. That at the time, that's how I felt. And these bands were kind of, this is music that we don't want to let go of, and we will further this type of music. But in listening to those on that playlist, they didn't differentiate themselves from each other all that much. And so therefore, Fish saying, I want to fly the Marillion flag was 100% on, because who wants to sound just like everybody else around them? We have to be the one that rises to as the cream of the crop of all these bands that kind of sound the same.
And I did not follow any of these bands through the 80s. I was familiar with IQ. I always liked IQ, and I listened to a lot of their stuff, but they were never always on my forefront. I mean, they never came to the U.S. until like the 90s or the 2000s. But a lot of those bands, I listened to the playlist too, only because I was interested in what they picked. And I think, they all have kind of their own personality, but if there's a touchstone, they all sound like Genesis at some points. And it's interesting in this Prog article, they kind of talk about some of that too. It's a really great article because nobody's bitter. And they're all very older and wiser about that time and can see it for exactly what it was and exactly what they achieved. And even when they say, we wish we were this, it's more of a recognition rather than a regret.
Right. But the stuff that I was listening to out of that playlist was all this early stuff by these bands. So it's their very beginning stuff.
Yeah. So this is turning into a very long episode, so we're going to break here and break the episode in two. Thanks for watching, and join us for part 2 of 80's Prog.
Thanks.